I was in the middle of a Home Depot parking lot in Boise, loading bags of mulch into my trunk, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was an Idaho area code, so I picked up. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Carla. She said she was the estate sale coordinator I had hired to go through my father's house in Meridian, the one I'd been putting off clearing for 7 months. She apologized for calling on a Saturday. Then she said something that made me set down the bag of mulch I was holding. She said she had found something in the study, behind the false back panel of my father's old roll-top desk. She said she hadn't opened it. She said she thought I should come alone, and that she'd wait. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 54 years old. I live in Boise with my wife Karen, and I've spent most of my adult life being the kind of person who does not believe in premonitions or gut feelings or any of that. I believe in facts. I believe in what you can see and verify and prove. My father raised me that way. He was an engineer retired from the Idaho Power Company after 34 years, and he thought in straight lines. He measured twice. He did not speculate. He passed away 11 months before Carla called me. He was 81. The doctor said it was a stroke, a significant one, the kind that doesn't leave much room for recovery. He lasted 4 days in the ICU at St. Luke's before his body made the decision his mind no longer could. He had been sharp until almost the end, the sharpest 80-year-old I have ever known, the kind of man who still balanced his checkbook by hand and could tell you the interest rate on his savings account to the decimal point without looking it up. After he died, I was the one who handled things. I'm his only child. My mother passed when I was 19. A car accident on I-84 that I still can't think about directly, only sideways. It had been just the two of us for 35 years. My father and me. He'd lived alone in the house in Meridian, the one he and my mother had bought in 1987. A 3-bedroom ranch house on a quiet street with a backyard cottonwood that had gotten so large it was lifting a section of the back fence. I had grown up in that house. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to clear it out. Karen came with me twice to start, and both times I found a reason to stop. His reading chair still had the shape of him in it. His mug was still on the kitchen counter. His handwriting was still on the notepad next to the telephone, a grocery list he would never finish. I finally called Carla Hutchins and her company in May. A friend from work had used them when his own mother passed. He said they were respectful and thorough and didn't make you feel like a stranger in your own grief. I met with Carla once at the house, gave her a key, and told her I trusted her judgment on what to keep, what to donate, and what to let go. I did not tell her about the roll-top desk. The roll-top desk had been in my father's study for as long as I could remember. He had bought it second-hand when I was in grade school and refinished it himself over a winter. It was the kind of desk you saw in old law offices, with a tambour lid that rolled up and a dozen small compartments and cubbyholes in the back. He kept his important papers there, stamps, his reading glasses, when he forgot where he'd put them. He had never in my memory mentioned a false back panel. I drove to Meridian without telling Karen where I was going, which I realize now was an odd decision. I told her I had an errand to run. She was used to me disappearing into myself when things got difficult. She understood it even when it frustrated her. I just felt the way Carla had apparently felt, that whatever was in that desk should be seen first by me and only me. Carla was waiting on the front porch when I pulled up. She was a practical woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the manner of someone who had spent years sitting with other people's grief and had learned how to be present without being intrusive. She walked me inside without saying much. The house smelled different, with most of the furniture tagged MTA, already becoming a different place. She led me to the study and stood in the doorway while I went to the desk. The false panel was in the back of the main lower compartment. It looked like the rest of the wood, flush and seamless, but Carla had been taking careful inventory, and when she'd pressed on it to measure the depth, she'd felt it give. It swung open on a small magnetic latch. Behind it was a manila envelope, letter-sized, sealed with the metal clasp my father always used, and on the front, in his handwriting, 2 words, "For Daniel." I didn't open it there. I thanked Carla, told her she could continue with the rest of the house, and I carried the envelope to my car. I sat in my father's driveway for a long time without opening it. The cottonwood in the backyard was visible over the roofline, a strip of afternoon sky behind it, flat and blue and ordinary. My father was not a sentimental man. He had never written me a letter in my life. I drove to a park 2 blocks away, a small neighborhood park with a duck pond and some picnic tables, the kind of place where nothing consequential ever happened. I sat at one of the tables and I opened the envelope. Inside was a legal pad, folded in thirds, covered in my father's tight, careful handwriting. 6 pages, front and back, and beneath the legal pad, a thumb drive in a small Ziploc bag with a strip of masking tape on it, and on the tape, also in his handwriting, the word evidence. I read the legal pad first. My father had been keeping notes for almost 2 years before he died. The first pages were calm, methodical. The way he approached everything. He had noticed a discrepancy in his brokerage account, a withdrawal of $11,000 that he hadn't authorized and couldn't account for. He had called his financial advisor, a man named Russell Hale, who had been managing my father's retirement accounts for 9 years. Russell had told him it was a fee adjustment, part of the annual portfolio rebalancing process, something he had signed off on in the original management agreement. My father had written, quote, "He was smooth about it. Didn't miss a beat, but I came home and pulled out my copy of the agreement, and that language isn't in there." I knew Russell Hale. I had met him a half-dozen times over the years, at my father's house, at a Christmas party once. He was in his mid-50s, trim and friendly, the kind of man who remembered your name and shook your hand firmly and made you feel, for the duration of the conversation, that you were the most important person in the room. My father had trusted him completely. He had said so more than once. According to the legal pad, my father had gone back through 18 months of statements after that first discrepancy. He found 6 additional transfers, ranging from $8,000 to $23,000, all described in similar language. All he now believed were fraudulent. The total, by his calculation, was a little over $104,000. I had to put the pages down. I was sitting at a picnic table in a park in Meridian, Idaho, and my hands were not entirely steady. I picked them back up. My father had not immediately gone to the police. He had instead done what engineers do. He had documented. He had built a file. He had requested copies of every transaction record, cross-referenced them against his own bank statements, called the brokerage company's compliance department twice, and been told both times that the fees in question were consistent with his account agreement. He had written, "They're protecting him, or they're blind. Either way, they're useless." But that wasn't the part that changed everything. That came 4 pages in. About a year before he died, my father had started having what his GP called episodes, brief periods of confusion, some dizziness, an incident where he had stood up from his chair and briefly not known where he was. His doctor had ordered an MRI, which showed some minor white matter changes consistent with his age, and had diagnosed him with early vascular changes, suggesting he cut back on salt, increase his water intake, and monitor his blood pressure. My father had written about this matter-of-factly the way he wrote about everything, but then the tone of the note shifted. He wrote that he had mentioned these episodes to Russell during a meeting in March, and that Russell had suggested he speak to a friend of his who was a naturopath and specialized in cardiovascular support for men their age. He had given my father a card. My father, who in 40 years of adulthood had never consulted anyone but his primary care physician, had apparently gone. The naturopath's name was someone I had never heard of, operating out of an office in Eagle. He had sold my father a regimen of supplements, herbal compounds, he'd called them, with impressive names and longer explanations. My father had been taking them for 11 months. He wrote 4 pages in handwriting that was slightly less controlled than the rest. The letters a little larger, a little less evenly spaced. I stopped taking the supplements 2 weeks ago. The episodes have not come back. I read that sentence 3 times. Then he wrote, I want to be careful before I accuse anyone of anything. I need to find out what is in those capsules. If I'm wrong, I'm an old man seeing things that aren't there. If I'm not wrong, I need the evidence to be airtight before I hand it to anyone. He had been an engineer for 34 years. He understood that a theory without data was just a story. The last 2 pages of the legal pad were a chronology. Dates, amounts, names, the sequence of events as he had reconstructed them. At the bottom of the final page, written in heavier strokes as though he had pressed harder on the pen, was a single paragraph. I have not told Daniel about any of this. My reason for that is Marcus. I know Daniel. If I tell him, he will want to act before I'm ready, and he won't be able to hide it from Marcus. And if Marcus knows I know, the evidence becomes worthless. I need more time. I hope I have it. If I don't, Daniel will find this. He knows where I keep the things that matter. Marcus was my brother-in-law. He is married to Karen, my wife, her younger brother. He is 47 years old and lives 20 minutes from us in Nampa. He has 2 kids in middle school. He coaches Little League. He was at my father's bedside the last morning, standing next to Karen and me, and he had gripped my shoulder afterward in the parking garage and said, "He was a good man, Daniel. He really was." I sat at that picnic table for a long time. A woman walked by with a stroller. 2 kids were feeding bread to the ducks. The cottonwoods along the pond were throwing seeds into the air. Everything was completely ordinary. I drove home slowly. Karen was in the kitchen making pasta when I came in. She looked up and asked how the errand went. I told her it was fine. I said I was tired. I went to the bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed with the envelope in my hands, and I thought about my father sitting alone in his study for almost 2 years, building his case, protecting me from something he didn't yet know the full shape of, staying his hand while he got sicker, and tried to figure out whether the sickness was connected to the man he was already investigating. He had been 80 years old, and he had done it alone. I called my daughter the next morning. Nadia is 27 and works in IT security in Seattle, which meant she was the only person I trusted with what I was about to ask her to do. I drove to a FedEx store and overnighted her the thumb drive along with a note that said, "I need you to look at this before anyone else does. I'll explain when I can." She called me 2 days later. She said there were 2 folders on the drive. The first was a collection of scanned documents, bank statements, brokerage records, a printed email exchange between my father and Russell Hale in which Russell's explanations became progressively vaguer and more condescending, and a copy of the naturopath's intake forms with the supplement regimen itemized. The second folder contained a single audio file, 42 minutes long. My father had recorded a meeting with Russell Hale 8 months before he died. It was in his living room. I could tell from the ambient sound, the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the way sound moved in that house. My father's voice was steady and precise. He had laid everything out, calmly, methodically, in the way he did everything. The discrepancies, the missing authorization language, the timeline of withdrawals. Russell Hale's voice was friendly at first, patient. The voice of a man who had done this before, who knew how to let confusion wash over him without absorbing it. He said the fees were clearly documented. He said the agreement my father had was an older version. He said age sometimes made it harder to parse complex financial language. He said it twice. My father said quietly, "Russell, I've been reading complex documents since before you were in high school. I'd like you to explain specifically which clause authorizes a transfer of this size without my written consent." Russell paused, then he pivoted. He said my father had seemed more forgetful lately. Had my doctor adjusted my medication recently? Sometimes cognitive changes affected how people processed financial information. My father said, "My cognition is fine. I've had it evaluated." Then my father said, "I've also had the supplements analyzed." There was a silence on the recording. I counted 8 seconds before Russell spoke again. He said, "I'm not sure what you're implying." My father said, "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you what I've done." Russell said he thought my father should speak with his family about his concerns. He said it in the gentle, calibrated tone of a man trying to make another man feel fragile. He said he worried about my father living alone. The recording ended there. 8 seconds of silence, not the silence of a man who had just been accused of something he hadn't done. The silence of a man calculating. I drove to the FedEx store again and called Nadia from the parking lot. I told her everything. I told her everything. I told her about Russell. I told her about the naturopath. I told her about Marcus. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dad, you need a lawyer before you do anything else." She was right. I called an attorney named Patricia Wren that afternoon, a woman who had done civil litigation in Boise for 30 years and who a colleague of mine had used in a contract dispute. I reached her assistant, said it was urgent, and Patricia called me back within the hour. I told her everything from the beginning. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Marsh, I need you to bring me everything you have. Do not make copies beyond what you've already made. Do not confront Russell Hale. And I need to ask you directly whether the person you mentioned, the family member, is in your household." I said yes. She paused for just a moment. Then she said, "For now, that doesn't leave this conversation." I brought Patricia the envelope the next morning. She moved faster than I expected. Within a week, she had connected with a detective at the Ada County Sheriff's Office, a financial crimes investigator named Detective Aaron Price, who reviewed the documents, listened to the recording, and referred the supplement question to a forensic toxicologist in Boise. The toxicology report came back 5 weeks later. 3 of the capsules in the supplement regimen contained elevated levels of a compound called coumarin, a substance found in certain plants, including tonka bean and sweet clover, that in controlled therapeutic use is related to blood-thinning medications, but in sustained elevated doses causes neurological symptoms, dizziness, cognitive disruption, and in older patients with any degree of existing vascular sensitivity can produce symptoms that closely mirror the progression of natural age-related cerebrovascular disease. The naturopath, whose license turned out to be from a state that had since tightened its credentialing requirements, had been prescribing this regimen to at least 4 other elderly clients. 2 of them were dead. My father had no pre-existing vascular disease before he started those supplements. His records, going back 8 years, confirmed it. The deterioration had tracked almost exactly with the start of the regimen. Russell Hale was arrested on a Tuesday morning in early October. The initial charges were fraud, elder financial abuse, and theft over $10,000. The supplement case took longer to build because the naturopath's records had been partially destroyed, which became its own investigative thread. Eventually, the district attorney added charges of criminal negligence and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The connection to Marcus emerged 6 weeks into the investigation. What the financial forensics showed was a series of Venmo transfers and 2 wire transfers made from an account belonging to a Shell LLC that traced back through 2 layers to an account Russell Hale's business partner had access to. The transfers had gone to Marcus over a period of 14 months. He had reported them to Karen, according to bank records, as consulting income from a side project he was developing. She hadn't questioned it. I wouldn't have either. What Marcus had provided to Russell was information. He knew approximately what my father's retirement accounts contained, because Karen had mentioned it once, and Marcus had mentioned it to Russell at a poker night, and apparently Russell had decided that was enough of an opening. Marcus later said he had not known what Russell planned to do with the information. He said he had thought it was about redirecting fees, and that my father probably wouldn't notice, and that he had needed money, and had told himself it was complicated but not seriously harmful. I have known Marcus for 23 years. He was in the waiting room at the hospital when Nadia was born. He called me every day for a week after my father died. He told me, through a lawyer, that he hadn't known how far it had gone. I do not know completely whether I believe him. I think he had chosen very carefully not to know. He was charged as an accessory and with misprision of a felony for failing to report what he eventually admitted he had come to understand. He accepted a plea arrangement in exchange for cooperation with the prosecution of Russell Hale and the naturopath. He did not serve prison time, but the plea is on his record. Karen did not speak to him for 5 months. I don't know fully what passed between them in private, and I have not asked because that grief belongs to her. Her brother had, by his own admission, helped a man target their father-in-law. She loved Marcus, and she had every reason to, and the math of that is not mine to simplify. Russell Hale was convicted on all fraud charges. The elder abuse and criminal negligence counts resulted in a longer trial and a complicated verdict. He was sentenced to 7 years and will likely serve 4. The naturopath entered a separate plea. The civil suit that Patricia filed on behalf of my father's estate recovered the $104,000 plus damages, and those funds went to Nadia and, in part, to a patient advocacy organization at St. Luke's that provides financial oversight support for elderly patients who live alone. It seemed like the right thing to do with money that had been taken from a man who had spent his life being careful. I still live in the same house in Boise. The house in Meridian sold in the spring. Before Carla's team finished, I had them leave the roll-top desk. I couldn't sell it. It's in my study now, in the corner by the window. I've started keeping my own papers in it, my own notes, the small archive of things that matter. My father had built a false panel into a second-hand desk and filled it with evidence that he never got to deliver himself. I think about that more than I can explain. I've read those 6 pages of legal pad so many times that the fold lines are starting to separate. There is a line near the end, just before the paragraph about Marcus, where he wrote something that was not like anything else in the document. The rest of the notes were technical, precise, the handwriting of a man building a case. But this line was different. He wrote, "I have not told Daniel because I want to protect him, and I know that is probably wrong of me. He has always trusted people more quickly than I have. I hope that doesn't change." I have thought about that a great deal. He had spent his whole life teaching me to measure twice, to verify, to not accept what something looked like at face value. And then in the last 2 years of his life, alone and getting sick and watching money disappear from accounts he had spent 34 years of work building, he had also spent his energy protecting me from what he feared I wasn't ready to see. He was wrong to do it alone. He knew that. He wrote as much. But I understand why he did it. The people most capable of complicating our lives are almost always the ones we have already decided a long time ago to trust without the clause. My father had built an airtight case from an armchair in a house in Meridian, Idaho, with a legal pad and a thumb drive and the same patience he had brought to 34 years of keeping a city's lights on. He had been sick, and he had been careful, and he had been entirely alone in it. And when he ran out of time, he put it behind a panel in the desk he had refinished with his own hands, and he trusted that I would know where to find it. He was right. I keep thinking about my father sitting alone at that roll-top desk. Not the version of him I knew growing up, the one who coached me through algebra at the kitchen table and drove me to school in the dark on winter mornings. The version of him from those last 2 years, 80 years old, getting dizzy when he stood up too fast, watching money quietly disappear from accounts he had spent a lifetime building, and choosing, every single day, not to fall apart. That is the part I come back to most. He had every reason to panic. He had every reason to call me and say, "This is what's happening. I'm scared. I need help." Instead, he pulled out a legal pad and started writing dates and amounts in his tight, careful handwriting. He requested records. He cross-referenced statements. He sat across from Russell Hale and pressed record on his phone and asked his questions without his voice shaking. At least not on the tape. He built something airtight, and then he hid it in the desk he had refinished with his own hands 30 years earlier, and he trusted it would be found. I used to think that kind of steadiness was just his personality, something he was born with, the engineer's temperament. I don't think that anymore. I think it was a choice he made, repeatedly, under pressure, while he was sick and deceived and alone in it. That is not temperament, that is character. And then there is the question of what he chose not to do. He did not confront Russell. He did not call Marcus and demand answers. He did not protect himself by burning the situation down before the evidence was ready. He sat with what he knew and what he suspected and what he couldn't yet prove, and he held all three things at the same time without letting any of them collapse into something reckless. A man with less self-discipline would have made that phone call to Marcus. I know because I wanted to make it myself, and I had the evidence in hand when I wanted to. The line he wrote about me is the one I return to most often. He wrote that I had always trusted people more quickly than he did. He wrote that he hoped that wouldn't change. He was not criticizing me. He was telling me something true about myself, with the same precision he brought to everything. And he was also telling me that he had spent 2 years working around that quality in me, not to diminish it, but to protect it until the time was right. That is what I mean when I say this story is not just about Russell Hale or what he took or what the courts eventually did with it. It is about what my father understood that I am still learning, that integrity is not only about what you do when people are watching. It is about what you do in a quiet room with a legal pad when no one is watching and the outcome is uncertain and you are not feeling well. And the person you most want to call is the person you cannot call yet. He got it right. Not perfectly. He knew he had waited too long. He wrote that himself. But in the ways that ultimately mattered, he got it right. He left me a map. He left me evidence. He left me a sentence about trust that I have thought about every day since. I am still learning to hold those two things the way he did, to stay open to people and to stay clear-eyed about them at the same time, to move carefully when something feels wrong, rather than either dismissing it or blowing it up, to document, to verify, to wait for the right moment, and then to act. He was an engineer for 34 years. He understood that the work you do before the failure is the work that determines everything after.